Good afternoon and most welcome to H528 or 728. It's a misnomer, and I think that goes to show very clearly what happens to such a thing as memory execution if you do something Alexander called endgaming. We have discovered that many of the troubles we are suffering from in modern times are actually caused by endgaming, a term that Alexander phrased in order to show what happened to our posture when we stand up, walk, talk and such. But it's also in the thinking. We try to preempt something. And there is very clear indication that also such a thing as dyslexia is caused by the mind trying to preempt the spelling before the cognition of the spelling has come to the consciousness. So what happens is they see a line of letters, for instance the word observation, but before they've been able to cognize the whole word, they grasp just a faint aspect of it, and then they try to copy that. And apparently they do the same thing while writing from mind and writing from dictation. And that's incredibly interesting. So we could do endgaming also in our thinking. And this also partly explains, I would think, I had an explanation before, why is dyslexia so uncommon in East Asia? There's a big mystery. Many people have been thinking about that because that could actually help to explain what dyslexia is. We or at least used to have a very dim understanding of what it is. So what people have been saying is something to do with the brain, something to do with the learning mechanism, but nota bene, those are not valid explanations. That's just a rephrasing of the question. Obviously it's something in the brain. To say it's something in the brain doesn't explain anything. We need to know exactly what mechanism there is. Endgaming is an excellent explainer in this case. And that also shows the result that a dyslexic person put on paper. It does very often look like the proper word. Very often. And sometimes you can see it looks like the proper sentence. But on careful inspection, it's not correct. So they try to copy a dim image instead of doing the more laborious work of using one letter and then another letter and then a third letter and then a fourth letter, then a fifth letter. That is spelling, and that is a sequencing that can be mislearned by endgaming. You skip to trying to copy the whole thing at once or before you've been able to do the whole process. And now we have an explanation why it's so uncommon with dyslexia in East Asia. The reason being spelling doesn't exist as such. Very, very seldom you need to spell in that way. You don't have to learn that laborious sequencing. At least you don't have to learn it at an early age, because here you copy an image in its totality. And also the discipline that's built into the actual image stops you from endgaming. There is a natural stop there, because when you do the image, you will always do it in the same order. But when in Western countries, spelling in the head to see what you're supposed to spell and then write it are two different things. They need to be equal, but they are still two different things. And with a dyslexic person, they remain different. They're supposed to be the same. So there is an end-gaining process in thinking as well. But if you ponder about it for a while, it does make sense from different aspects, because we know that thinking is some sort of movement, and lighter thinking is lighter movement, and also spelling is a movement that involves the head and the position between the head and the neck, although this movement is incredibly small, not to be visible to the naked eye. But there are indications that are pretty clear that there is a movement going on. And we must remember, and this is very important, the area in the neck where the head goes to the topmost cervical, the atlanto-occipital joint. It's incredibly filled with nerves. It's very, very specific. It's probably that area that has the most specific movement of all areas, possibly with the exception of the hand. And the reason is it's extremely important. To be a human being can actually be defined, as Alexander said, by that positioning. Because everything we do starts there. We are top-oriented and directed in a way that is very, very dependent on that. And that includes the execution of speech, as Alexander himself showed with his problems when it came to his orations. He was doing Shakespeare as an orator, earning quite a deal of money in Brisbane and Canberra and Melbourne in Australia. And this is where his problem occurred with talking. But he also noticed the intonation changed. And then he noted further, what you say is dependent on this very, very precious balance. So if you have a good balance, you will not say the same thing as if the balance is some sort affected or not optimal. And then we have it already in the writings of Alexander, because if it affects your wording, it will also have a similar, lesser effect in thinking as well, because there is a close connection between language and human thinking. And something that, for instance, Barbara Tversky brought up. She shows that thinking starts with action. And she also showed that it started as well, which I like. I like history and historical development. But she showed how abstract thinking started in painting, engraving, doing things with our hands, and the very, very important connection between our vision and what we do with our hands. That connection is special. That connection doesn't exist with the other senses, which makes it very, very special. But let me get into some new definitions of inhibition experience and endgaining experience. Attention is placed on what you are trying to achieve rather than on how to achieve it. So the goal comes first rather than the quality of how you do it. And quality includes everything like precision, but also sequencing. remember the lettering, the spelling bee. Z. The goal is the destination and not the journey. Come to think of a Swedish poet here. It was Karin Boye who said something. Det är vägen som ger resan sitt värde. Something to that effect. That it was the actual traveling that made the journey worthwhile. We are presently in Alingsås, and it was most visited by Karin Boye because she had a friend living here in Alingsås. Actually in that area where I spent my first 4 years, Aspånsvägen. And I often went to the stone where she had her last breath. And I realized many, many years later who she was and what she did. She was a very good author and poet. But she has a point there. We often disregard the actual journey. And here's another aspect when it comes to why dyslexia is so unfrequent in East Asia. And it has to do with the preparation. They prepare everything unnecessarily complicated. They have extra unnecessary movements in everything that concerns spelling, writing, doing the science. And especially in juvenile age, the preparations takes longer than the actual writing. And this stops all possibility of end gaining almost completely. And it's not hard to see the purpose of these preparations now. They could be beautiful, they could be elegant, they could have a ceremonial purpose, but I'd say this purpose is the most important. They stop you from progressing beyond what you are actually doing. And it seems they have an intuitive understanding of this, because so many things in East Asia stops you from going directly to the goal. There's often something hindering. Yes, very frustrating for us Westerners. Entering a house in Korea, Japan is a hassle. Shoes needs to be removed in a special way, and you have to say something as well before you enter the house. And opening the door is in itself a hindrance rather than helpful. IKEA hasn't made much success in selling in their own door that opens directly. Instead they have sliding doors, and to make the things worse, they're often made of papers. I don't remember the surprise I put on my Japanese family when I lived there for a while, when I put my whole hand through the door. It's made of paper, it's easily done. And they just looked at me amazingly, like I was some sort of elephant. How was that possible even to do? Well, I wanted to get in. That's the reason. Well, that's end gaining. The positive aspect is inhibition. And that's, you have a sort of response. And we have to be careful. Is it a response to an outward stimuli or an inward stimuli? I don't think it makes any difference. The stimuli can come from inside, but it could also come directly from outside. Of course, an outside stimuli is, I'd say, harder to resist, especially if it involves another human being. Second, that would be an animal, but human beings are really imposing on our reactions. We react immediately. It's impossible if somebody approaches you and you don't open your head and look at the person. Actually, it's incredibly intimidating if the person doesn't do that. And I think it gives us the experience that the person is very well controlled and possibly dangerous. It's a good way to intimidate someone if you are in an uncertain area. If you meet up with somebody you don't know, turn your head very slowly to that person, or don't do it at all. And there's another question here, and is that so that end gaining has a particular purpose? Well, I'd say end gaining, oddly enough, doesn't have a purpose. It could be the will not to perform the action. And this is what they suspect with dyslexia. It could be caused by lack of intention, of willing to do the thing. And well, of course, we are talking now about a very, very shallow willing. But it could be that you're not interested in doing the stuff. It doesn't have to be consciously aware. But in some obvious way, your system knows if you end game, you will not succeed in doing what you are intended to do. And this is actually something mentioned by James Clear, that the only way of finishing something is by doing it minutely, very controlled in small steps, whereas we fail when we make it in a big step. And come to think of it, those big steps are in a way self-defeating. And he was thinking, a person that tries to do it in a big step wants to fail, because that is the only possibility actually to fail. Of course, it could be very inwardly, but it does ring a bell in me when I'm absolutely non-interested in something, and especially when you were younger. If you didn't want to do something, you usually did it in a manner that wouldn't succeed. You didn't have your intention to do it. And that often happened when I wanted to go home and I had to put all my clothes on, whereas I really wanted to go home. And especially if it was warm outside, I didn't need the clothes. I didn't put them on, I left something. And that is partly intentional. So this also opens up another sphere of understanding of what is really intention. And it could be that we are not aware of our innermost intentions. And come to think about it now, it's very obvious in my career. I notice people, especially when they start own businesses, sometimes you get the feeling they don't want to succeed, because by hopping in the procedure is the only way to have a failure. And too often they do that. So the intention was not 100% to succeed from the beginning. And here is a resounding word from Alexander himself. If you do the procedure, there is no way you will not succeed. And that is maybe one of the most important paragraphs in Use of the Self. It's most accessible book, I would say. And I think it's important from many different aspects, because understanding that could help a lot of understanding the principle of inhibition. Because actually it shows that your intention is something a little bit bigger than you think. And quite a lot of you is participating in intention. And failure to succeed with what you want to do has more to do with how your intention is than actual failure or some sort of chance. It's interesting. Inhibition could also be sort of word, a catchword to put in your head to remember to stop oneself, because it's a mighty positive word. Inhibition opens up possibility to make choices. It leaves you out of that serfdom that is immediate response. Because I think, especially when I'm looking in deeper into burnout syndrome, often it's very, very obvious that the person who get burned out doesn't really, in a way, care to some degree. Although if they want to perform the tasks, it's not with their whole system. In a way, they feel forced to do it. They don't know how they feel forced. The force can come from in oneself, could be something with the upbringing. But it was something I heard speaking to people connected to young eye skills. And this younger lady, very nice, Astrid, she was called, she said that in her professional career, she already decided that she's going to work as hard as humanly possible, and a little bit more. And she discovered much later she had a thinking in her head already. And that thinking was, rest I can do when I die. She already had that in her mind, and she was only like 30 or something. Rest I can do when I die. That's not taking care of the procedures anymore. Because if you leave yourself out of the action, you are the one who's performing it. How are you supposed to perform the act well if you leave yourself out of the equation? There's something to ponder about. It struck me as very honest when she said that. We are losing contact with ourselves, but to a certain degree also with reality. If we call reality the things that we want to perform, and we call ourselves the inner balance, or what we actually do with our bodies, we seem to be losing in both ends, both aspects. In the thing we're supposed to perform, for instance spelling, we lose the accuracy, and in the end we can also lose understanding. It will in the end, and of course no school, no pupil will understand at that stage that it could actually make their spelling much more difficult and much, well, 10 times more laborious. But of course, she understood much later, in order to perform her job correctly and to a quality degree, she needs to take herself into the equation. And that's also an interesting argument. If a person has lost all touch with her or himself, you will lose the quality as well. It can sound like a mad argument. Of course, a person wants to take care of the body. Well, in some cases, the person is so out of touch with him or herself that this argument is the only one that works. And I think it's an interesting argument, and it can stop a person, for instance, if they think their job is incredibly important. Think of a neurosurgeon or a very good doctor. They could have this idea of end-gaming, and they could say, it's not just about me, it's for humanity or something like that. Well, in that case, you need to put yourself into the situation. You need to take care of yourself, in that case, for humanity. So you will perform your operation, your surgery, to the utmost best. And it is actually the case that most surgeons, and this is my next point, they do actually take excellent care of themselves. It's rather unusual that they are burnt out, especially if what they do is fairly complicated. Listen here, if it's enough complicated, you cannot rush. Because neurosurgeons, if you're a neurosurgeon and you have to operate on nerves or neurons, so complicated that you need to have your whole system vividly active. And oddly enough, these people are usually very, very present in their bodies and in their surroundings. And I think that could also be a good pointer to how do you get closer to inhibition, why you need to take in what's around you in a nice way, of course not stressful. It should come to you easily. You shouldn't like stare like this and try to take everything in. That will only stress the system. But to a certain degree, let things come to you. We have a specific example here, and it's not from surgery, but it's in dentistry. Something I watched the other day. I went to the dentist and I actually spied on the other dentists. I took my chances while I was in the waiting room, and I had a gander at 4 different dentists working. And I saw at least one doing endgaming. 2 of them were obviously not doing it. They were taking care of themselves, but 1 were actually doing it. And he was twisting and bending his spine in order to gain access to the mouth. So what happens in dentistry? You need to get to the different teeth, the tooth in the mouth. And that is rather difficult. The mouth is not constructed to make it easy for a dentist or anyone else for that matter. The teeth are rather long inside the jaw. And to reach them, you need to change position with your whole body as a dentist. It could be easy to endgame. And instead of moving your body with the spine first, going upwards that direction, they just make a twist with their backs to reach the tooth because they want to fix the tooth. That's the endgaming. Now they need to take care of themselves because it's costly to do that in the long end. It costs a lot. 2 other dentists actually had quite severe spine operations because that twisting will bear on the spine in the long run. So not endgaming in this context means that the dentist is mindful of oneself and also think about a proper access to the patient's mouth and its teeth will indeed help the work as well. Not only in the long run, but also in that specific moment, because you will be more aware of what you're doing. Because if you twist your neck, awareness disappears as well. So you see here, it's a bit of a Klein bottle, or for you who haven't heard about Klein bottle, we could call it moment 22. You shut your own body up because you need to not listen to your body, and while you're doing that you lose perception of reality at the same time, and because this is painful you will shut it out even more. What can you do instead? Well, you will put some awareness into the moment by taking in the surrounding. And this is also, oddly enough, a sort of endgaming. Because you wonder, why should I take in the surroundings? They're no use for me. For instance, in this situation, what is used for me now is maybe my bag, the video camera here, the mobile, the coffee, if I want some coffee, maybe some papers. Those are important. The surroundings is not important. Oddly, the surroundings are important because they have a connection to how I treat myself, my back. And the moment, this is the moment now I do actually experience that. The moment now I take in the surroundings, my weight goes over to my heels. I was standing more on my toes. I've been traveling here with a little stress because I ended up in a queue for half an hour. And there is a little stress. I'm standing on my toes a little bit. I notice that now. And that's the reason to take in the surroundings. I think in the end you won't even need this argument why you should do it, because you will feel so much better by taking in the surroundings. You feel in your body. But I think at the beginning you need to be convinced to take care of your body, because in the beginning you don't feel your body, and then you wonder, why should I do that? I don't feel anything anyway. This twitching doesn't hurt me, you think, because you don't feel it. So you need to get convinced, and I think that should also be the responsibility of a good Alexander teacher, to convince a student who doesn't really understand why he or she should take care of himself. Use argument. I'm not a fan of argument, but in this case we must actually use the idea of the Jesuits. Say that in this case endgaming is actually quite morally okay. Ändamålen helgar medlen. The means are justifications for the goal. And that is taking care of the patient, even though it's a little bit endgaming. Apparently you can't get rid of endgaming with no endgaming. You need some sort of endgaming to convince the endgaming person to stop with endgaming. That's very interesting, actually. That's not something to be frowned at. Pedagogy is everything, because we all start as learners. And the failure of a teacher or an educationalist to understand that is devastating. We need to put ourselves on the level of the one who's supposed to learn. Otherwise, it's no use. So you can repeat to yourself as an argument to stop automatic reaction, to stop holding, to stop tightening, to allow the weight to travel down to the floor, as I did now, to prevent unnecessary effort, to block the pathway for habitual reaction, to stop, collect yourself before action. Collect yourself before action is this bracing. It's like, I get up on the chair, and what do? I collect myself, I brace myself, and this happens 1 millisecond before I stand up. There's no need for this bracing. It's an unnecessary, ugly movement, not to be done. And you could actually stop yourself from doing that. But it takes training. Inhibition is a training thing. It won't happen at once. There's no chance of that. And wanting to do it at once is endgaming. You see here, we need to be rather delicate when it comes to this subject. You need to be very careful with what you are trying to do, not to endgame. This is an often cause of failure. You get endgaming in trying to stop endgaming. You need to be kind to yourself. And it's about time that you become kind to yourself, because you've been treating yourself really, really hard for a long time. Years, decades. And it's like this poor Esther told me, she already accepted her death penalty, more or less. Not to live until she was dead. She was really eloquent, really like, came like a knife to my heart, that attitude or that insight. And he wasn't conscious until afterwards. You zoom into the, how we say, ekorrhjul, into the wheel that small hamsters run around in. So we are happy with this wheel going around, but we don't care where it's going. Because the odd thing about endgaming, it doesn't really achieve any end in the end. An interesting paradox here. So what we have here, to sum the whole things up, excellently resumed by Nichols. Nichols is well recommended. Odd spelling here though. He has two L's at the end. I looked for him before and I didn't realize that he had two L's. So that was, I think, 1 year ago. I'm going to look up Nichols once more. And I think he was the first one to state that it's actually a cognitive process. It's something to do with your own thinking. And to have a certain pattern of thinking installed in yourself, almost like a straitjacket. Yeah, you could call it a straitjacket. And this is these directions, because they go in a certain order. They are mechanical. They are exactly what they're supposed to do. They are in the exact sequence, and that becomes a straitjacket to stop you from endgaming in your mind. And this is very similar to the thing that put on little children, or used to do anyway, stopping them from running away or into the traffic or something, like a little leash or some sort going all over the body. I think this canting or words are a stopping of immediate thinking. And the more you can execute the directions, no matter how boring they are, execute them to the utmost detail. And the reward that you will get in the end at stopping tool in your mind from the rushing thoughts of wanting to execute thinking directly, to jump a step in thinking. Because, mind you, I had extensive experience with hard thinking, and I know how easy it is to, when you sit with a terrible long equation, you want to go to the end and just write the answer somewhere, because it's a pain. It's a pain, it's horrible. But that pain is actually necessary, because that pain is a good training pain, that you are stopping something. It's you stopping that anxious, greedy child within you who wants to reach the end. This is very close to the marshmallow experiment. I told that many times, but it's very cute. Just go into the YouTube and put in the search string marshmallows and kids, and you see an experiment where they serve a marshmallow to a kid and say, you can eat that, enjoy, but if you wait 4 minutes, you will get another one. You can eat both of them. These experiments were performed on kids in the 60s, and they follow those kids through their whole life until now, I found out recently. This is a time period of almost 60 years. And it goes to show that the kids that had developed different methods, like this straitjacket methods, that's called self-regulating with another word. A neurological term is self-regulating also. And you construct something in your mind to stop your thinking going to the goal. In this case, it was the marshmallow. So what these kids did, and since they are kids, they don't have so much inward thinking. You could actually see what they did. So they consciously looked somewhere else, away from the marshmallow. This is what we need to do in our minds. The thought can still be there, but you look away from it, because you cannot block it out. You put your interest somewhere else by force, and the kid forces its head to the side. You can do that. The same thing we adults can do in our mind. The straitjacket is the directions. It could also be a rhyme, could be a hymn, could be a song, could be anything. They should be complicated, because if it's too easy, it will not distract you enough, because your attention will that slide over to the original place. That's why it's so important that the straitjacket you construct must be cognitively taxing. It must be an effort to remember it. It cannot be too easy. It cannot be 2 words. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And it must be rather complicated. So you see here, we adults do exactly the same thing. And of course these kids who were good at avoiding to look at the marshmallow or to think about it, they later developed other procedures, more inside their heads, to help them avoid thinking about endgaming when they were put in front of laborious, arduous, boring tasks. They can put their mind to doing the task that was at hand, just with the idea it will come a reward later. And that's postponing the reward. And the kids who could not postpone the reward, the figures were absolutely clear. They did not succeed in their careers, family-wise, socially-wise, even when it comes to pastimes like doing sports or gambling, you name it, whatever it was, some interest, gardening. It did not succeed them, because they already established a habit of endgaming, going for the marshmallow, and they never developed this later coming mental devices, because an adult doesn't do that. This is something tempting, it doesn't look away like that. We do it internally, and we use different procedures, and actually these procedures are quite complicated, and they can be taught. And in some cultures, these procedures are actually taught. And of course, this is stranding into another subject. But one thing that could be good is, in certain cultures, you never complain. Whatever it is, you accept it. And by complaining, it's a sort of endgaming. That's going directly to the end result. So that will stop you from reaching your goal too early. And also, all easy methods are usually, they have different, how can you say that, culturally bound or developed through the centuries, systems to make things more difficult. For instance, it could be in language. Sentences has to be made in a way that stops you from going directly to what you want to say, because you really want to say something. This is, I think, how stuttering is so common in Western culture, but quite frankly very rare in East Asia. The language itself stops you from going directly to what you want to say. And if you go directly to what you say, you start stuttering, because you want to do the action step by step. And in the end, you get habituated and you can't tell the difference, because time is relative to our human beings. And what is possible for one person is no longer possible for another one. That's why it's so very hard to correct dyslexia. There are actually some promising methods now, but they are taxing. They need the person to learn this patience first. And that could take years, but it will be worth it. What happens in the long run when you learn inhibition, you will start to sense again. Because in the habituated end gaining process, there's a shutting out of sensuous data. Because it disappears. If you do it directly, you don't care about the different steps in between. And if you go directly, it's like time is shortening. That area becomes dark or non-existent even. And therefore, the sensory data will not come to you anymore. It will not be registered. And then you will stop actually to feel your body. So it's a feedback process. Why not? When you not put attention to each step, the feedback from the body will stop coming. And that's the reason, if you end gain enough, you don't feel your body again. You end up with this non-proprioceptive mode of being sort of numb. You don't feel pain anymore. You feel even more pain in a way. Because not feeling pain is pain. Actually, a poem by Wordsworth, if I don't remember right. But the good news is our neurons are plastic. Plasticity is all our body. Everything of this can be relearned. And it will change. It's impossible not for it to be changed. Because that's how we are built. We are built to change. That was the problem, but it's also the positive thing. We are not stuck with habitual patterns. We human beings can actually change everything. And we are, in that aspect, incredibly lucky compared to the animals. Because animals are instinctual to a much higher degree. They cannot change the patterns. And if they can change them, they can only change them in the juvenile stage. And all of you who inherited an old dog knows that. Try to teach it to sit while it has like 4 or 5 years. It could take a whole year. A friend of mine did that with an old dog. That's not the case for human beings. We have the capability to learn all life. In this way, actually, human beings stay juvenile their whole life until they die. And there is a good reason for that, because human beings need that plasticity. Because our upward position makes so many much choices than what an animal would have. It's very hard to count that, but I think Ted Damon said something in the vicinity of 1 million more choices, but possibly much more than what a horse would have, for instance. So that's one of the reasons our head, you call it a reason, you could call it a reason, why the head is placed upon the spine, is to give us an enormous amount of different options. And those different physical options are also thinking options. So stopping and gaining in thinking will open up your thinking. Because what you will notice once you get out of that cognitive strut, the whole horizon will open with opportunities. And this was actually the story of a famous physicist, Stephen Hawking. Because when he learned end gaining by accident, because he got ALS, but when he learned to stop end gaining, he learned to stop thinking. He did not go into the mode he had before. He realized somewhere on the way that he could actually change his thinking. Of course, he was very happy to have changed his thinking long before he got completely paralyzed, which he did in the end, because it would have been impossible with a horrible strain that you have when you're completely paralyzed to change your thinking then. He did it before. But that meant that he could actually live a happy life, even paralyzed. Because thinking opens up everything. It's incredible. And although I don't agree with most of what Stephen Hawking said, but that's the physical part, when it comes to how he describes his life, yeah, that's astonishing. That he could, like the only person on this planet, live a decent life even in that situation. That's quite amazing. But that was his opening up of his mind. He had everything. Because he, even in the end, as he wrote somewhere in his biography, that he opened up the difference between the material and the thinking. Became the same thing. He could almost create his own universe. I think this is one of those amazing things that you can actually achieve. There's one of the Alexander gurus, if you call him, McGowan, who means Alexander technique or something similar with inhibition, is actually what spirituality is, that you can reach the godness somehow. Because once you start opening up all possibilities is godlike in a way. Because then there is no limitation anymore. Everything is possible. And this is what getting out of the strut can do for you. Well, I think this is well enough for this afternoon. Very interesting stuff anyway. Most of this is coming from Nicholas, but there's so many authors of this conjunct paper who doesn't even have a name. But it's mighty interesting, and I hope there will be an opportunity to get back to this very interesting subject. And I wish you all a pleasant afternoon. Do enjoy, take your chances, and until next time, bye bye.
Thank you.